What's going on, everyone? So I was at the laundromat yesterday afternoon doing my weekly load of clothes, just sitting on one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, waiting for the dryer to finish its cycle and trying not to fall asleep from boredom. The place had one of those old TVs mounted in the corner that was barely hanging on by its bracket, playing what looked like ESPN with terrible picture quality and no sound. I wasn't really paying attention because I was scrolling through my phone, checking social media and responding to texts. But then I glanced up during a commercial break and saw NBA Today was on doing this segment about the Warriors' embarrassing loss to the Hawks. The graphic on screen showed something about Golden State desperately needing perimeter defense and shooting, and they had Keon Ellis's stats displayed with his 41% three-point shooting and nearly 2 steals per game. I immediately stopped what I was doing and pulled up the ESPN app on my phone to watch with actual sound through my headphones. And what I heard was honestly one of the most detailed breakdowns of the Warriors' roster construction failures and how Ellis could be a low-cost solution that addresses multiple needs simultaneously. The analysts were going through Golden State's defensive struggles, Luke Kennard torching them for 6 threes, Jonathan Kuminga sitting on the bench making $25 million while the team can't score, and how a player like Keon Ellis represents exactly the type of 3-and-D role player that winning teams acquire at the deadline to shore up weaknesses. I ended up sitting there in that laundromat for an extra 20 minutes after my clothes were done, just watching the full segment because the way they connected the Warriors' immediate needs to Ellis's specific skill set, to the trade framework involving Kuminga, to Sacramento's motivation to move him before free agency, was genuinely some of the most strategic deadline analysis I'd heard all season. Let me walk you through everything that went down on NBA Today, because the desperation in Golden State and how Keon Ellis could be the Band-Aid solution they need created this narrative about a franchise in crisis mode trying to salvage Stephen Curry's final elite years. Hey, what's up, everyone? Real quick before we get into everything, that like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do, but honestly, the biggest way to support this content. Every single like pushes this further, so hit it now. So they opened the segment with Charlie Walter and Matt Kolsky, basically saying, burn the tape, just burn it completely. And while you're at it, rip up the current roster as constructed, because it's clearly not working. They had some thoughts on who the Warriors need to go after, and according to some rumors swirling around, moves may be coming to fruition very soon with the trade deadline approaching. The game recap against Atlanta was brutal. The Warriors lost 124-111 in a game where they were down 12 in the third quarter, went on a 10-0 run in 70 seconds that included a Podziemski 3, a Jimmy Butler bucket, a DeAnthony Melton bucket, a Butler steal, and a Steph 3. From there, it was all Luke Kennard going absolutely nuclear on them. And this is where Keon Ellis entering the conversation as a potential solution makes so much sense, because what happened with Kennard is exactly what the Warriors cannot allow to happen in playoff basketball. The exact numbers on Kennard were ridiculous. He finished with 6 threes, 6 of 9 shooting for 22 points. But those 6 threes came in a span of maybe 8 minutes of real time, not even game time. It felt that fast and overwhelming. The only thing more overwhelming than the speed of Kennard's barrage was the fact that the Warriors could not find him defensively. Kolsky was saying, it's Luke Kennard, not Steph Curry running off screens. There was a lot about tonight, where the Hawks are just playing better basketball right now than Golden State. But there are parts the Warriors can't fix with the current roster, while other things are just bananas, like not finding Kennard in that stretch. He was hot as fish grease, and they didn't have a body on him. Then Steve Kerr went to his zone defense in the middle of that run, which made no sense. Way too often this season, you stare at Warriors games wondering what the heck they're doing. And that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people watching. Could a lot of that have to do with roster construction? Absolutely. The perimeter defense need is glaringly obvious and critical for any championship aspiration. The Warriors desperately need someone who can guard multiple perimeter positions with tenacity and intelligence, generating steals and deflections while staying disciplined in team defense. Keon Ellis provides exactly that profile. He's a disruptive defender, capable of generating steals and stops. Someone who can check opposing guards and wings without needing help. The floor spacing and shooting ability Ellis brings cannot be overstated in terms of system fit. With a career three-point percentage above 41%, he would provide reliable perimeter shooting, which is absolutely crucial for the Warriors' system that revolves around Stephen Curry's gravity and off-ball movement. When Curry commands so much defensive attention, having knockdown shooters around him who can punish defenses for overhelping is essential. The cost-benefit and contract flexibility makes this move extremely appealing for a team up against financial constraints. Ellis is on an incredibly affordable contract at just $2.3 million this season, making him a viable trade target. Despite the Warriors' salary cap limitation, he'll become an unrestricted free agent at the end of 2025-26, which might actually motivate Sacramento to trade him now, rather than lose him for nothing in free agency, if they don't think they can re-sign him. The connection to larger trade discussions is where things get interesting. The interest in Ellis could be directly linked to bigger trade packages involving Jonathan Kuminga, where Ellis might be a valuable piece coming back to Golden State in a multi-team deal. If the Warriors are moving Kuminga to Brooklyn or elsewhere, Ellis could be routed from Sacramento as part of the return. Would Michael Porter Jr. fix the Warriors' problems? That was the main debate of the segment, because all the rumors right now are swirling around Porter potentially coming to Golden State. It's hard to vet sources nowadays since anyone can pay for verification on social media, but when there's smoke, there's fire. It sounds like the Nets don't actually want Kuminga in return. Maybe the Kings would get involved in a three-team trade with a lot of moving parts. But the consensus question was, if trading for MPJ and it netted you Michael Porter Jr., how would you feel about that trade versus pursuing someone like Keon Ellis as a more affordable, lower-risk option? They were going to talk about Porter for a large portion of the show, but first they dissected how the Hawks game went wrong. Jalen Johnson was probably the best player on the floor, with 23 and 11, though Curry was pretty damn good too with 31 points and 5 assists, despite 3 of 11 shooting from 3. Curry was realistically the best player on the floor, even with that shooting line. But Johnson is a hell of a player who's really developed into a star. Keely Alexander-Walker, at 27 years old, is having his best season averaging 20 points on 45% shooting and 37% from 3. He's not an all-star, but he's been productive, and what struck the analysts is that he's finally in a situation where a team is asking him to play a significant, consistent role and score the basketball, and he's doing it. The comparison was made to Moses Moody, who was drafted 14th overall and has been jerked around by inconsistent playing time and unclear role definition. Will Richard, Brandon Podziemski, Gary Payton II, and Moody all played between 12 and 17 minutes against Atlanta, and you just can't do that. It's never going to work when guys don't know what their roles are or how many minutes they're getting. But you also need more talent, and this is where someone like Keon Ellis becomes relevant as an alternative to swinging for a bigger name. They definitely need more talent and are missing a third scorer. But even if they get that scorer, the talent they have won't succeed unless it understands its role and gets consistent minutes. Steve Kerr used to be great at this during the first championships, taking guys like Maurice Spates, Leandro Barbosa, and Sean Livingston and putting them in defined specific roles that led to some of the best success of their careers. There might not be a Livingston hiding on this roster, but maybe there's a Spates or Barbosa type who could thrive with clarity. Right now, Kerr has no feel for this roster, and you don't know if it's even his fault, because the front office has to take responsibility for creating a situation where they're paying Kuminga $25 million to sit on the bench while watching a team that can't score. Steph Curry and D'Anthony Melton combined for 61 points in the loss. They're awesome, but they're a player away from being really good. And this is where the Keon Ellis versus Michael Porter Jr. debate really heated up, because Ellis represents the affordable complementary piece, while Porter represents the expensive swing-for-the-fences move. If they turned Kuminga and Moody into someone, would Ellis be enough? Or do they need Porter's scoring punch? The developmental argument came up regarding Jalen Johnson, who was picked 7 spots after Moses Moody, and is clearly better than anyone on the Warriors under 30 right now. But Johnson wouldn't be Johnson if he'd been drafted by Golden State based on how they've handled young player development, so it's tough to go back and second-guess draft decisions in hindsight. There were at least 10 teams that wish they'd taken Johnson, who's probably the second or third best player from that draft, but he fell to 17th for reasons including questions about motor and work ethic. It was a full developmental project getting him to buy in, and who knows if that would have happened in Golden State's veteran-focused system. The first look at Atlanta post-Trae Young trade showed a team that could absolutely win the Eastern Conference despite being too far back for the 1 seed. If you're New York, you do not want to see that Hawks team. They have multiple guys to throw at Jalen Brunson all night. They're long and athletic. They run and play crazy defense with Dyson Daniels leading the way. All the hustle stats have Atlanta near the top of the league in deflections, loose ball recoveries, and all that stuff. That's the team they developed with Trae on the bench and Jalen Johnson in the lead role. And adding CJ McCollum just gives them a scoring boost while removing Trae's defensive liabilities and pace-killing tendencies. The Anthony Davis injury question came up briefly, with speculation that Davis did everyone a favor by getting hurt right before the deadline, because it narrows down Golden State's option. Trey Murphy isn't going to be available per reports, which brings the focus to 1 or 2 names that people are circling. Joe Lacob just had his 70th birthday with a big smile. Maybe he knows something about a deal being close. The Michael Porter Jr. versus alternatives debate consumed a large portion of the discussion. Some people in comments and on social media have said Porter isn't the dude, and the Warriors should look elsewhere at names like Trey Murphy or others around the league. But it's become increasingly clear, after games like this Atlanta loss, that Golden State has a glaring weakness: the ability for someone besides Curry to knock down shots consistently. When Jimmy Butler fadeaways and top-of-the-key threes are some of your best offense, and you're relying on Al Horford to make incredible passes to free up guys, and you're counting on D'Anthony Melton to be your potential third scorer, you need someone who's a shot taker and shot maker. That's Michael Porter Jr., who's averaging 27 points, damn near 40% from 3 in a career year at 27 years old. He's attainable, but will probably cost 2 first-round picks, with 1 potentially being top 10 protected. Plus, the trade would involve Kuminga and Moody going out. The picks are a hefty price. Talking about this coming year's first, which at best will be middle of the pack, plus probably the 2028 first, which, depending on what happens, could be a pretty good pick if Curry's not on the team anymore. Kolsky doesn't love it, because he doesn't think Porter makes the difference you want him to make. Are you riding off into the sunset as the 7 seed hoping for a playoff series win? Just enjoying basketball, knowing this team's not winning a title? Of course they're not winning a championship as currently constructed, but the question is, what moves actually give you a legitimate shot? And this is where Keon Ellis re-enters as the more conservative, lower-risk alternative. Instead of giving up 2 first-round picks for Porter, who has his own flaws and might not close games if Kerr doesn't trust him defensively, what if you add Ellis for significantly less? Maybe Moody and a second-rounder in a 3-team deal, and use your remaining assets for another move? The Trey Murphy comparison came up with Murphy viewed as a lesser asset than Porter, but someone Kolsky would rather have. Murphy is capable of big scoring nights, but is a more aware defender and better seamless fit offensively, not a guy who's going to look off Curry or dominate possessions. The problem is, Murphy's off the table per New Orleans. Steve Kerr's relationship with certain player types was discussed as a concern. If Kerr doesn't like guys looking off Steph Curry, and Jonathan Kuminga, who can score, has been relegated to the bench partly because he's not particularly aware or intelligent as a basketball player, then Michael Porter Jr. might create similar issues despite being a better bucket getter. Porter might be historically a better rebounder than Kuminga, which is an edge, but this is the year Kuminga rebounded great, and Kerr still decided to DNP him. Are the Warriors close enough to contention to bring in someone who's flawed but can score at a high clip and make it work? That's the fundamental question. The dream target remains Lauri Markkanen, who Kolski would move heaven and earth to get, even trading Draymond if required, though he thinks it could be cobbled together without that. He'd trade 3 first-rounders for the Markkanen tier of player, but doesn't think Porter is quite on that tier, more like a level below. Porter can shoot the heck out of the ball and is a reasonably dynamic scorer, though not a particularly good ball handler, so he wouldn't solve any playmaking problem. But he's exactly the kind of player this coach doesn't like, and that's how they got to this disaster situation, with a player who can score but the coach doesn't like in Kuminga. They'd have to have some guarantee from Kerr that he's on board with Porter before making the trade. But even then, if the coach doesn't trust him defensively, Porter might not close game. If you trade 2 picks for a guy who can't close when it matters, you'd feel bad about that investment. But they do need a scorer, and Porter would make them better, probably finishing top 6 if they made that trade with Kuminga, Moody, and the picks. The question is, would he get the second most shots as the number 2 offensive option, or would he still be relegated behind Curry and Butler in crunch time? What Denver's success has shown is how damn good Jamal Murray is, with Porter basically being the 3rd guy behind 2 All-Stars orchestrating that offense. With Golden State, he'd have Curry's gravity and Butler's paint presence creating opportunities, but he'd still be the 3rd option rather than a primary creator. The Big 3 concept offensively, with Butler getting into the paint, Curry with his gravity, and Porter hitting shots at the end of possessions instead of Moody or Butler with 4 seconds left on the shot clock. That's a way more dynamic offense than what they currently have. The picks are concerning, but what else can they do, if not Porter? For Markkanen, Kolski would trade 3 first-rounders because it's not just that he's better than Porter, he solves their problems better. You can play him at center, the 4, or even the 3. He's a knockdown shooter and more dynamic overall scorer than Porter, less of a gunner and heat check guy. Plus, he's a good defender, whereas Porter is questionable. Someone made the point that Porter is the sexy trophy signing. He's glamorous, you see him drop 32 in highlights, and want that guy. But in championship-level basketball games, you need guys making stops, staying focused, making the right plays. Did Porter really do those things on Denver's championship team? Or did he just hit big shots? That's what Golden State needs, and what Keon Ellis provides at a fraction of the cost. The right plays, the defensive focus, the smart decision. He won't give you 32-point explosion, but he'll give you consistent 3-and-D production that makes everyone else better. That's valuable, maybe more valuable than Porter's scoring, in the context of what this roster needs. Brooklyn's motivation to move Porter was explained. They don't want Kuminga, they want the picks, because Porter doesn't fit their timeline with 6 rookies on the roster. They're years away from competing, and their only problem is Porter and their coach are too good, and they're not losing enough. Porter's not part of their long-term future, so he has trade value, with Kuminga probably flipping to Sacramento for another first-rounder in a 3-team framework. The contention question is whether any move makes Golden State as good as the Thunder or Nuggets, and the answer is probably not. But living in reality means you can be much better and give yourself a better shot, because the best team in January doesn't always win the title. Just because they won't be Thunder level doesn't mean they shouldn't try, versus keeping Kuminga on the bench being mediocre. That's where asset management comes in. Kolski wouldn't give up the picks for Porter because he doesn't think it improves championship odds that much. Porter makes you better, but not that much better. So if it costs 2 firsts, he'd rather go a level up and give 3 for someone like Markkanen than 2 for Porter. Other names were discussed as alternatives. Jaren Jackson Jr. from Memphis would be interesting, a big who can shoot and really defend despite foul problem. He might not be available, but if the Grizzlies are tearing things down, he'd be worth pursuing. Ja Morant does nothing for them because him and Steph in the backcourt doesn't make sense. Andrew Wiggins came up as someone they'd love. And if the Heat wanted Kuminga, and you could get Wiggins just giving up the 2026 first, that's a no-brainer. That's adding Wiggins in exchange for nothing since Kuminga has zero value sitting on the bench. And we've already seen how that partnership works. Pretty good. And this is where circling back to Keon Ellis makes the most sense. If you can get Ellis in a 3-team deal involving Kuminga going to Brooklyn or elsewhere, Sacramento getting young pieces and picks, and Golden State getting Ellis plus maybe another rotation player, you've addressed needs without mortgaging the entire future. You still have flexibility to make additional moves rather than being all in on Porter. The game recap wrapped with Curry and Melton having good games, Al Horford making great passes, Butler abusing C.J. McCollum early, with his headband-worn Wayne Chisholm style sliding off his head. But the overwhelming theme was, the Warriors need a scorer. The MPJ, he's the scorer. Let's go.